From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's coming up. From Iowa State University, Lee Schulz with this week's comments on the cattle market trends. He'll offer his thoughts on the possible impact of this harsh cold weather on the markets, both near and longer term. And Lee reports on the favorable new USDA numbers on beef exports for December. Also, K-State's A.J. Tarpoff will talk about identifying and responding to hypothermia in newborn calves. He'll go over the signs of a calf in trouble, the various means of warming those calves up, and the time required for calves to adequately recover. And on this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Shannon Rogge about several upcoming events within the 4-H Equine program. All that here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You are listening to Agriculture Today. Thanks for being along with us on this Monday. Well, the cattle markets, like about everything else, are feeling the repercussions of this inordinately cold weather that has set in the last several days now. And we'll visit a bit about that and other things regarding the cattle markets as Lee Schulz has joined us once more, livestock economist, Iowa State University. Lee, you've been tracking this cold impact, and we'll talk about that, but if one steps back and generally recaps last week's trade, it was pretty slow on the cash-fed cattle market, slow to develop, that is.
It was, and I think it's been pretty steady trade. We've seen trade anywhere from 113 to 114, 180 dressed. I think that's really kind of reflective of what we've seen in the futures market. Kind of traded steady all week. We actually seen it heat up on Friday. So I think we're just kind of feeling it out. It's a contract month, and really when you stare at that February contract on Friday closed at just over 117, and then the April contract is over 125, that's almost an $8 spread. We're going to look at maybe a 9% increase here over the next 12 months or so. And so, there's going to have to really heat up in the cash market, especially. We're $10 under that in the cash market. So, there's a lot of optimism out there. And I think, it's pointing to maybe some supplies tightening up. And, box beef prices have been rather strong as well.
Since you mentioned it, that February live cattle contract, there have been actual deliveries against that contract, you say, which is something of an irregularity, isn't it?
It is. Live cattle deliveries, it is a reality in a contract month. And really, you can point to them as it worked. And so what those deliveries do is that helps force that convergence of that contract to a basis level that is, typical or what we see historically. And so when you looked midweek, you've seen futures trading at over 117, almost 117 and a half. You've seen the cash market at 113 to 114. And then the first day you could tender deliveries on Feb 8th, you see 9 contracts tendered. And then the next day you've seen 66 contracts tendered. And what that does then is it forces those markets together. And I think we've seen a little bit of both. You did see some weakness in the futures contract, as well as you've seen some stronger bids in the cash market. There's a lot of dynamics that go in there, and I don't think we have the time to get into that here. But I think it's another form of showing that these markets do work. And we are seeing those basis levels converge and more into those historical levels.
Also in last week's market action, the cash feeder auctions, well, as one would expect, the weather had to have at least a partial impact on the volume of cattle traded. But there seemed to be, Lee, if a trend could be detected, a tendency for those heavier weight feeders to trade to the higher side.
And I think we're going to continue to see that for a variety of reasons. And we'll talk a little bit about the weather, but I think you're really seeing here that we're seeing stronger bids because of the corn market situation. Even though we did see some decline on that market, it's really setting up the incentive to place heavier animals. And that's where the bids are getting. And so I would really expect that to really continue and even be greater because of the cold snap we're facing here.
And speaking of which, you called it, as we conversed prior to our broadcast, the cold snap for the ages, which has set into a large part of the central United States. The short and long-term implications of this adverse weather as it affects the markets. What do you read there, Lee?
Well, I think this has got the potential to really shake some things up. We really already had some big feeder cattle and cull cow auctions already canceled for the week. And so I think what we're potentially going to see is some impact here on some placements of these animals, at least delaying of those placements, and maybe some opportunities to see some higher prices next week because of the low flows. I think the cull cow market's really starting to heat up. You're seeing some good cows that are selling in the 60s. Could that push them up into the 70s next week because of that limited volume? And I think you could also speak to it from the feeder cattle market standpoint. So, we'll see how big of an impact it has. It certainly has an impact on gains. That's well known. We're not going to see some very strong gains. You already see 6 pounds come off the steer weights here this last week. When you just look at an average of the national data, I expect that to come down again seasonally, as well as because of this cold weather. So this is going to have some ramifications here, more so than what we maybe typically see because of the cold weather.
And cattle feeders contending with the disruption in performance. They're contending also still with those higher corn prices. And that's an influence that won't go away anytime soon, will it?
It won't. And I think, maybe kind of what gets lost in this conversation a little bit. I know there's been a lot of talk of those costs of gains are reaching $1. And, I think that's reasonable. That's what my model shows. But what doesn't get talked about is those last few pounds are a lot more expensive than $1, right? Because you're losing efficiency at those heavier weights. Corn prices have been really creeping up. So I think that's really going to, help make some decisions for feedlots. Do we start seeing them even market lighter weights? And that may really start to draw on these feeder cattle supplies in turning around those feedlots.
Let's go to the demand side, and you mentioned boxed beef, that it's hanging in there, which is maybe aseasonal when we think about boxed beef trends. It's rather reassuring to see boxed beef prices do as well as they're doing, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's both a demand and a supply. So, certainly I think demand's held up stronger than we thought it was going to. We've seen boxed beef come down a little bit this week, but the fact that it's stalling, I think, is a good thing, and really remaining at these levels. We did see slaughter down for the week, down almost 5% through Friday, more like 2% because we had a pretty big Saturday kill. There was one plant, the Dodge City plant, what was offline this week for just some routine maintenance. And so the Schuyler plant is scheduled for that maintenance in March. And so I think, that supplies are a bit limited, are also supporting that boxed beef trade.
And the export scene, new numbers out from the USDA covering the month of December. What did those tell us?
Very good sign. I think, we knew some of this given the weekly data, but December was one of the better months that we've seen, I think, in the last 10 years or so. And so it really showed that, we got some momentum at the end of the period. And I think that's likely to continue over into here, what we're seeing in 2021, where there's a lot of outstanding sales there from a lot of our major as well as emerging markets.
As you look at those numbers, what markets are standouts as far as doing business with the U.S.?
South Korea and Mexico, those are our typical markets that we count on. We're seeing large outstanding sales to South Korea. China gets a lot of attention, and it should, as we look at beef trade is up there over 2,000%. It's even hard to say that number. But I think we're seeing some positive signals here that we've made it through the pandemic, or a lot of the big disruptions of the pandemic. And I think we're seeing expectations of strong demand, strong wholesale values. I think is showing what we're seeing domestically, and these export numbers are just another piece of that puzzle.
Yeah. Great to hear that news. So rounding this out, as we look at the trading week ahead, once more with the weather pattern that it would be more challenging to pin down where this trade might be going in the next few days, Lee.
I think it is. But if Friday gave us any indication, we've seen considerable strength in those markets. And so, that could be a signal that we carry that over. I don't think we're likely to see a lot of impact from just reduced sales and reduced supplies, because, this is going to be relatively short-lived. Hopefully, I think by next weekend, it's supposed to heat up. And I think by weekend, even those sales are going to start to continue. But, I think this is having an impact on production with lighter weights. And, we may see that come in the beef numbers. So, I expect the week to be steady. And if we see some early week momentum, I think we could see that carry over into the week.
We would like to see a warm up on many fronts, including the cattle market. Thanks, Lee, as always, for your comments, and we will touch base again in a few weeks.
All right, thank you.
He's out of Iowa State University, livestock economist Lee Schulz, with those observations on the cattle markets. After the break, a look at something a number of you cow-calf producers have already been contending with the last few days: extreme cold stress on newborn calves. Input from a K-State veterinarian on responding to that. Next on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today continues now, and in reference now to this awful cold weather that has beset Kansas the last several days, and we've even chillier temperatures expected as we get into this evening, and the stress that this is bringing on our cattle herds, in particular those newborn calves, as several producers have already entered the calving season. We've invited by once more beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff of K-State Research and Extension for some thoughts on contending with hypothermia in those beef calves. Now, the adult animals can suffer cold stress as well, but it really is those calves which are most vulnerable. AJ.
It really is. That's absolutely right, Eric, because adult cattle, they're pretty robust. They have that huge functioning rumen that really acts as their heater core during the cold winter months. These young newborn calves, once they get dried, they are pretty thermal, okay? The hair coat can really protect them from the elements. But when we have wind mixed with a wet calf that just hit the ground, that's when we really start seeing some issues.
What temperature ranges do we enter the danger zone with calves?
No, great question. So when a calf is born and a calf hits the ground, our normal temperature that these animals should be, internal temperature, should be between 101 and 102. Okay, so kind of 102, 101 and a half or so Fahrenheit is kind of that normal temperature for these cattle. We start getting into signs of hypothermia, which we'll get into that, below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So the first tip and first tidbit that I would love to shout out for producers is go get a rectal thermometer. That is our best indicator of how extreme the stress is of cold stress or hypothermia is activating on our on these newborn calves is have a rectal thermometer and take a temperature. That's how we know how extreme it is and what we're going to do to combat it.
How low can that internal temperature fall before this becomes truly threatening to the calf, though?
So let's kind of walk through that stage, okay? So below 100 degrees Fahrenheit is where we start seeing mild signs of hypothermia. What we'll see in the calves is they start having shivers, okay? We get cold, we have shivers. We start shaking. We actually have increased blood flow. We're trying to increase the metabolic heat produced by the body. Calves do this exact same thing, okay? So early in the process, we will see shivering. Once they continue to get a little shivered and, that shivering kind of progresses, we start dropping body temperature. That's where things start to change. The body itself starts to shunt blood away from the extremities. So what does that mean is the skin, the lower legs, the ears, the tail, the body actually bypasses and doesn't pump as much blood to those areas. The body is trying to defend itself, and the best way that it can do that is maintain core temperature and maintain warm blood going to the brain. Okay, so they will kind of scavenge their own body, so to speak, and hold that warmer blood inside the body. When they do that, we can still see some cooling of the organs. So once we go from 100 down to about 95, below 95 or so, we can start seeing cooling of the organ systems themselves. We can start seeing a little bit more what is referred to as kind of dummy calves. They kind of wander around. They're kind of non-responsive. They're still up and somewhat alert, but they're just not acting quite right. Some of the quote-unquote dummy calf syndrome, part of it could be hypothermia. This continues, and obviously the body continues to shunt blood away from the extremities, and we do start seeing slowing down of the body systems as we get cooler. Animals are still viable even into the upper 80s temperature-wise. Once we get into the mid-80s, about 86, 85, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, those animals should be about comatose. They'll be flat out. They'll be non-responsive. Their eyes will be dilated and a big old pupil. So those are very extreme situations. Other than a few odd breaths, a handful of them a minute, we would really not see that as a viable animal anymore.
And persistent ambient temperatures like we've had, actual temperatures 0 or below, well, that condition can set in pretty quickly, right?
It really can. So it can happen one of two different ways. We have immersion hypothermia. That means we have a wet animal. Okay, so a freshly born calf, they can chill rapidly. Okay, we can also have some of these young calves that are dried off. They're a couple of days old, should be getting up and going, but just due to the harshness of the conditions, they can drop their core body temperature as well. Yeah. So both of those can be pretty devastating.
So in responding, AJ, as a producer would discover a chilled calf, hypothermia is starting to set in. What needs to be done to turn the corner on that?
Absolutely. So, I think first and foremost, we take a rectal temperature. I think that's the number one recommendation to know how extreme of an intervention we need to take. If we are below 100 degrees, if we are within that 95 degrees or so Fahrenheit of internal body temperature, we're going to take some major steps to warm that calf up. Our goal is to get them back up to normal temperature. A few tips and tidbits on different ways that we can do it. Kind of the old tried and true, the defroster on the floorboard of the pickup, okay, the floor heater. What you can do is in the passenger side of your pickup, you can actually set up a cardboard box, just kind of cut in half, so you can actually set some blankets over the top of this calf, and you kind of create a little heat tunnel. While we're out checking calves, if there's a calf you're concerned about, you can pull it into the pickup, you can get it dried off, you can put it at the floorboard, and then we can continue checking cattle. Once we've gotten that calf warmed up, it can take maybe up to an hour to warm that calf up, all the way, to where it needs to be. In that meantime, once we've warmed it up, we may have to, supplement it with some colostrum. So be prepared for these young calves. Many of them may not have suckled yet. And when they're severely chilled, they do not absorb the antibodies quite like they should. So that's kind of the easiest situation. We can just warm them up, while we're on the go. Other options that are out there, if you have access to a barn, you have a nice bedded area, and possibly you might bring them into the shop where you have heat lights, okay? Heat lights and some warm blankets is kind of a thermal insulation. Once we get the calf dry, I think the number one thing that we need to do is dry the calf before we start to warm them up. That can be accomplished with some warm towels, some old beach towels. We can get those calves all kind of dried off, and then we can start the warming process. The heat lamps work great, but I do want to share a warning, okay? If you have hay around or if it's in a barn that's dusty, once these calves start to wake up, they stand up and they start rooting around, and unfortunately they can break or they can short out some of these lights. Some of the newer lights have protectors all the way around them to make sure that they're very fire resistant, okay? And then we don't want to inadvertently catch something on fire whenever the calf starts to wake up. So heat lights are another good example, but again, we need that thermal barrier underneath, whether good bedding, some towels underneath to really warm them up. Again, it takes time. We're looking at a couple hours potentially to warm the calf up this way. Hot boxes. Right. Okay, there are a lot of questions come with hot boxes, whether they're used with lights or we have warm air fans that blow through these. They're commercially available that are made out of plastic. I've seen some producers that have created and built some hot boxes that are really pretty nice and very functional. We want to make sure they circulate air, make sure that whatever the heating source is, the calves don't have an opportunity where they can burn themselves. Okay, so they do need to be constructed appropriately. I will say that the commercial products are very easy to clean. Usually they're made out of plastic where we can disinfect them and clean them between each animal. So the hot box isn't a nidus of disease. Again, the hot boxes are great to use. Some of them can get a little pricey, but it will take some time to circulate air and warm those calves up typically over an hour and a half. The quickest way, they've done some of this work on trying to figure out what the quickest way that we can warm calves up. And I'm here to say nothing is super quick to warm a cold calf up. We have this icy calf. Regardless of what we do, it takes time. But the warmest that we have available to us is warm water immersion, okay, the old bathtub. We're bringing the calf inside. We are submerging the calf, with its head above water. We don't want it to, breathe in any water by any means, but we're using warm water immersion to warm the calf up as quickly as possible.
But you say you have to be cautious about that as well?
We have to be extremely cautious whenever we use warm water immersion. Number one is we don't use hot water. Okay, this is warm water. We are just trying to warm them up to body temperature. If we drop them in too warm of water too quickly, if we put them in hot, like a hot water bath, unfortunately what can happen is we get the cold shunting that goes from the extremities that's very cold. It goes back inside to the heart and into the organs where we get cold shock. We can actually send those animals into a type of heart failure due to that cold shock. So to protect against this, again, we put them into warm water, typically right a little over 100 degrees, okay, but this is labor intensive. We have to keep adding warmer water to keep that temperature consistent, okay, and this, even with warm water immersion, we're looking at an hour to an hour and a half of pretty labor intensive to get the calf warmed up. So I throw out these time frames to be prepared. It is labor intensive to warm these calves up. We need to be realistic with how long some of these different warming techniques take.
Well, it's been a tough haul the last several days for producers who might have early calving going on. And we've a ways to go, according to the forecast, for the better part of this week. So producers need to take whatever steps they can, again, AJ, to keep these conditions from setting in. But likewise, they need to be prepared to react if, in fact, they do have it. AJ, we appreciate the input. Thank you.
Thank you.
A.J. Tarpoff on responding to hypothermia in beef calves. He is a beef veterinarian with K-State Research and Extension. We'll have more for you shortly on this Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Before we get into today's agricultural news headlines, what's on everybody's minds this bout with the excessive cold weather, reminding you that the Mesonet website out of K-State is tracking and recording this extreme cold weather event. It is providing real-time updates on the Animal Comfort Index from those 72 weather stations all around Kansas. That indicates the livestock stress level at each location and the contributing factors, air temperature, wind speed, primary among them, of course. Also, on the Freeze Monitor page under the Agriculture tab at the website, they've added something more, as K-State climatologist Mary Knapp told us about on last Friday's broadcast.
What we're looking at is upgrading the capacity, so instead of just seeing the last 24 hours below freezing or below 24, you'd be able to see as much as a week of time below that 24 and 32. We're also looking and anticipating having the ability to set a threshold that you could look at for that cold. So if, for example, you're looking at wheat production and 12 degrees Fahrenheit is the critical temperature, you could see how many hours that site is below 12 degrees, not just the 32 or the 24. So check that out. Look at our Freeze Monitor page on the mesonet.ksu.edu. And feel free to let us know what you think of that and whether or not you find that useful.
K-State's Mary Knapp there. Again, all of that information constantly updated at mesonet.ksu.edu. Take advantage of that resource as we work our way through this excessive cold around Kansas and in the region. The House Agriculture Committee last week approved the agriculture and nutrition provisions of the Democrats' proposed coronavirus aid package. The vote to advance that $16 billion package was 25-23 along party lines. Republicans argued they had not been allowed to help craft the provisions, which will become part of a $1.9 trillion stimulus and aid package. House Agriculture Committee Chairman David Scott and the Democrat chairs of the subcommittee praised the package when it was released. It includes $5 billion in aid for supply chain challenges related to COVID and direct aid going mainly to farmers of color, as well as an extension of higher benefits under the SNAP program and other nutritional provisions. However, House Agriculture Committee Ranking Member Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania called on Chairman Scott to jointly call on the Biden administration to unfreeze payments to producers under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or CFAP. Those were frozen shortly after Biden took office. Thompson said those funds should be unfrozen so that they can provide immediate assistance to farm families. Now, after more than 6 hours of debate on the Republican amendments, Representative Rick Crawford of Arkansas and Thompson both said they were disappointed in the highly partisan nature of the proceedings. Scott replied the reconciliation package was developed quickly to respond to the emergency that had developed because people had not been able to get vaccines against COVID. Scott assured the Republicans that the reconciliation package process will not set a precedent for the committee's future. Only one Republican amendment appeared to win approval. That occurred when Representative Cindy Axne of Iowa voted with the Republicans in favor of an amendment offered by Randy Feenstra of Iowa to make payments to farmers related to losses of crops, including losses due to the high winds or derechos. What do some industry stakeholders believe should happen to build upon a national foot and mouth disease vaccine bank, which was developed through the 2018 Farm Bill? A look at that now from the USDA's Rod Bain.
The livestock industry benefited in the current Farm Bill from development of a foot and mouth disease vaccine bank and funding for such. Now, with crafting of a 2023 Farm Bill approaching, Allison Rivera of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association says for cattle, pork, and lamb producers,
the bank is still going to be kind of towards the top of that list. We're going to need to continue to fund this bank beyond 2023.
Liz Wagstrom of the National Pork Producers Council says outside of the Farm Bill, increasing FMD vaccine supplies and availability is also a priority.
Efforts to be able to make FMD vaccine in the United States that would increase the capabilities of vaccine availability. So our killed vaccines in the stockpile are highly effective, but they cannot be produced in the United States. And so looking at some of those issues around biosecurity of vaccines is something we see down the road.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
On the agricultural calendar, the 2021 Cattlemen's Day at Kansas State University is all set up, the 108th annual edition. It will be an online format due to the COVID restrictions on the Manhattan campus. Registration will be free. All are encouraged to participate online via Zoom, and we'll tell you more about registering in just a moment. This year's featured speakers at Cattlemen's Day, Dr. Jason Lusk, Jason Rumley, and Robert Norris will all summarize how the pandemic has affected the U.S. beef industry from the producer and processor standpoints and beyond. Jason is the head of the Department of Agricultural Economics at Purdue University. He'll give a presentation entitled Pandemic Effects on the U.S. Beef Industry. Rumley and Norris are of the Radian Group. They'll present Beef Processing 2020 as well as the Retail and Food Service COVID-19 insights from this past year. Other presentations during Cattlemen's Day 2021, K-State Livestock Production Specialist Sandy Johnson will be talking about reproductive technology resources and tools, and K-State Research and Extension Meat Science Specialist Liz Boyle will lead a discussion on the pandemic's effects on small Kansas processors. At the end of the conference, organizers will lead a question and answer session. Also on March the 5th, the 44th annual Legacy Bull and Female Sale will go on at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. In-person attendance will take place here in Manhattan. The sale will also be online at liveauctions.tv. Anybody interested would be invited to look at the bulls prior to the day of sale and view the offerings online. You can visit asi.ksu.edu/legacy sale to learn more about this year's offering and to request a sale catalog. Once more, all of that taking place during the Cattlemen's Day on Friday, March the 5th. You can register very simply by going to ksubeef.org, ksubeef.org, or call Lois here at K-State at 785-532-1267, 785-532-1267. We'll return with more after this break. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H Coordinator for Agriculture and Natural Resources, Shannon Rogge, says there are a number of upcoming competitions and events for 4-H youth involved in the Horse Project, including both virtual and in-person events. Shannon, a lot to cover today in terms of equine horse judging is moving forward for April in Hutchinson.
Yes, so we will move forward with a horse judging contest in April in Hutchinson. That was, in the past, that has been held on different dates in different places, but this year, with our current requirements, Hutchinson has been the best fit that we've looked into, so we will be teaming up with a horse show there that weekend, moving in the day before them, and bringing youth in for a horse judging contest.
And this is really because they have the space, is that right? They have a large enough arena?
Yeah, they actually have 2 arenas, so we can make sure everyone is spread out. And then also, since we're right before a horse show, quite a few of them will volunteer their time and their horses because we have to have live horses for the contest. So it just works out better. Instead of hauling in separately, that we go to them. What kind of things go on at the horse judging competition? So this is a state contest for the 4-Hers. And at that state contest, this is a national qualifying contest for the seniors, which is the high school age, 14 to 18. And at that contest, they will be judging classes. So they will have a couple of halter conformation classes and then several performance classes that will be judging the horse's movement, patterns. So it's similar to what you would see at a horse show. The youth are taking the place of the judge. And so they are judging those classes just like a professional horse show might look like. And then they compare how they place the classes with our official placing. And there's a whole range of scores that they can get when you start comparing those placings. And then the really cool part for youth is that they take those placings and there's a public speaking portion. What we call reasons is they have to go defend those placings to a judge and give a short 30, 60-second public speaking defense of why they placed the class they did, and then they get scored on that as well.
Another event taking place in April is the Virtual Horse Quiz Bowl and Hippology, and that is taking place on April 10th and 11th.
Yes, so this is another move that we had to make because of some circumstances this winter related to COVID-19. Well, this was originally in the past for many, many years. The Quiz Bowl and Hippology was held at an event called Panorama at Rock Springs in January, and we were unable to host it there. So we have, through working with the Horse Action Team, we have looked at moving that to a virtual setting. It will be held the 10th and 11th that weekend, try to get both of them done there. Hippology will be on a Qualtrics format, and then Quiz Bowl will be a little bit of a combination of some Qualtrics, some live Zoom, so we can still get some interaction with the kids. But it should be a very great weekend, and we're just excited to be able to still have that contest for the kids to develop those skills.
Is Quiz Bowl individual or a team competition?
It is a team competition. Teams of four on one team, four on the other, and they go head-to-head. They will have rounds where it's one-on-one, so chair one versus chair one, and so on. And then there are some toss-up questions where anyone on the team can answer. So, but overall, you have to rely on your team members to have the winning score to get moved on to the next round. It kind of works as a tournament bracket. So you move on, and at the end, there's two teams going against each other. And then similar to the horse judging, for the seniors, Quiz Bowl and Hippology is also a national qualifying. So they will move on to another event next winter if they win the state contest.
There are some other online horse contests and public speaking opportunities coming up as well?
Yes, so these are all other parts of what you see Panorama. We are just spreading them out a little bit over the first couple weeks of April to give everyone the best chance to participate. Public speaking will be through a live Zoom format, so we can still get quite a bit of interaction with the judge and help them improve their skills. And that is public speaking presentation. That one is also a national qualifying, so they can move on if they would like. And then there's a lot of others. So we also have a logo competition that decides the design for the State Fair T-shirts. They'll decide the design for 2021 in September. And then there's also various ad layouts, photography. There's quite a few that we will all be doing digitally. And we hope to really have, an increase in participation with the increased accessibility with that online as well.
Also wanted to mention the fact that the district horse shows are moving forward for June and July.
Yes, so last year we had to cancel district horse shows, which is our qualifying show for the kids to advance to the state fair in September. So these district horse shows are hosted by various committees across the state, agents, volunteers, whoever makes up their local committee. There are 6 different districts. And so we just met with them last week, the chairs of those districts, to discuss any challenges that they are facing, make sure they all have facilities that are open in their area, if they need alternative plans. And everyone is really optimistic, and we are moving forward with all of those. So those district horse shows will be running about mid-June to early July. And like I said, the ribbon placings that they receive at those district horse shows will enable them to advance to the state fair.
Well, as I mentioned, a lot going on in the area of equine, and all of this information can be found online and probably even through a Facebook page.
That is correct. We are getting all of this information out. A lot of these have just been decided in the last week or so. So we are pushing out information through email listservs, our Kansas Ag and Natural Resources Facebook page, and the general website event pages as well.
That's Kansas 4-H Coordinator for Agriculture and Natural Resources, Shannon Rogge, with an update on upcoming in-person and virtual horse project competitions and events. Again, for more information, contact your local county or district extension office, or check out the Kansas 4-H website at kansas4h.org or their Facebook page. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.